Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, thank you very much for listening in. And it's a busy time with repotting. Had intensives, had lots of private work. We've done lots of trees out, lots of trees in, lots of first pots, lots of continuous pots, lots of lots of work, to be honest. And part of that process is moving at sometimes some quite big, heavy things and awkward things and things which can cause some damage. So I thought this episode of the podcast, I would focus in on injuries you should try and avoid when working with your bonsai. I thought it'd be a humorous one. I thought it'd be one that's maybe timely call for you if you are going to be doing some awkward lifting and moving and some stupid things like I've done that I'll reminisce on through this podcast. It'd just be a bit of a heads up, I suppose, so these mistakes can be as limited as possible, and the injuries can be as limited as possible. So anyway, should be a funny one. Strap yourself in, get ready for it. Here it comes. Right, so the first injury I strongly suggest you all try and avoid is finger slice version 1. Now, this one happens frequently. It's probably makes me sound terrible, but it does happen quite a bit when I'm sharpening my tools or I'm cleaning them. And the story I've got is I had a listener come into the workshop who'd sharpened tools. It was a little branch cutter, and said, "Oh, can you just check if I've done them sharp enough?" And I went, "Yeah, cool." So I get them out, and I'm doing a bit of a clean on the tools, and as I do it, push my finger along, slide back, tip of the branch cutter pushes into my finger, and I went, "Oh, geez, that's going to hurt. That's below the skin." Sure enough, stopped. Went, "No, it looks okay. Keep going." Next thing I know, drip of blood. It's like, it's not okay. So most common for me is when I'm using my rust remover tool, and I'm putting a bit of pressure onto that blade and I'm trying to keep my tools nice and clean, which is regular. I do it a lot. I do try and make sure that my tools are in pristine condition, nice and clean and nice and sharp. And both of those times, at some point or another, because I do it so frequently, I try and avoid it as much as I can, but the old finger slice version 1. That's number 1 on the list of things that you've got to try and avoid. Number 2, this was again a recent issue that I had, where it's falling over while carrying a tree. Now I've got to justify this, right? I don't just trip over when I'm carrying bonsais around the yard. But I was on a hill, I was on a slope, I was carrying a very heavy radiata of mine, the Beast. It's a massive tree. I don't know how much it weighs, but it's a bloody lot. And it's an awkward pot, and here comes all the justification as to why it happened. But I was walking up steps, carrying this tree, bending my back as far as I possibly could, knowing I was doing some damage in that section of my body, getting up to this podium, which involved actually then lifting the tree above shoulder height to get it back up there, because I was at a lower step. I know I should have taken a few more steps up, and then I could have put it on at a natural height, but I thought, this thing's so bloody heavy, I've got to get rid of it as quick as I can. So I'm marching back, pushing this radiator up onto this podium, and as I do it, I sort of slip a bit with my footing, roll into the garden, tree comes down as well. I just missed this metal sculpture that I've got in the back of the yard. Well, when I say missed it, it scratched my back with one of its Sharpie points, but it didn't go through me, which was quite fortunate. But I rolled, and as I was going down, all I could think was, "Oh God, please don't break anything off this tree." So I'm trying to push myself under the tree as it's falling down, crushed myself under this enormous pot, looked up, trees hit the ground. Luckily, radiators are very forgiving. They're very flexible. So nothing broken on the tree, just my pride. Looking around, make sure none of my family members were watching me in the garden. Actually, I should have called one of them to come and help me. But anyway, putting trees back onto the benches when they're a little bit too heavy, and falling while carrying bonsai is number 2 on my list of things that you've got to try and avoid. Number 3. Now, this is a bit more serious than the others, I suppose, because it's a repetitive injury for me, and it's bloody tendonitis, which seems to come only when I'm doing something highly repetitive. And normally, which only started really last year for me, was with repotting. And it happens more and more as the trees get more and more firm in their pots. So as my trees get older, more advanced, and the focus on their development purely comes from ramification, no extension of growth, which I need massive root growth for. When I want real control of the foliage growth, then I'll be more inclined to let them stay in their pot a little bit longer. And with staying in their pot that little bit longer means that they can get quite firm and those roots can run out of space to grow. So what happens is that root ball starts to turn into a brick. And the more bricky it becomes, the more like concrete it becomes, the harder you have to work to try and free it up. So therefore, I don't look at getting out the chainsaw and cutting through the root base and then starting to soften it. I use a root rake of different varieties, different strengths, different robustness. Some of them are quite light and delicate, others are more hardcore. But even with the hardcore ones, they still take a lot of work. It's like chipping away at concrete that you've got to do over and over and over. So you can imagine that repetitive action of working the roots. Well, it leads to damage, which is called tendinitis. Which, if you've never had it, which I hadn't before this point, it's a tingling or pins and needles type effect that comes in your hands after a long period of time. You know, it can be carpal tunnel, can be lots of different things. Anyway, this one's tendinitis for me, and how it represents itself, which you'll be very pleased to know, is in the middle of the night I wake up with my hands. I can't feel them. They're all tingly, and I have a real issue trying to sleep from the numb pain that comes from them. And it's bloody annoying as all hell. But to my rescue last year, a couple of my beloved customers brought along this arm brace thing that goes up my forearm that I used last year. And it worked great. After I put it on, it sort of helps control the forearm. Works really well. This year, you'd think you'd learn. You'd think you'd be prepared for this stuff. Get halfway through the repotting season, start to wake up with this pain in the night, and then suddenly go, oh, that's right. I got given something for that last year. Drag it out, put it on. Pain goes away. You can sleep through the night. It's much better. So, anyway. Tendinitis, that repetitive injury that comes, expect it. As you get a lot of bonsai, you'll be doing lots of repotting every year. You will, I guarantee, come across that sort of pain. All right. So now the next one on the list that I've put together for this podcast is what I call finger slice version 2. Now you'll notice that there's going to be a few of these throughout the podcast. I don't know if I call myself clumsy or just that we work with sharp tools. But anyway, this next one comes from when you're removing wire. And the story I've got to tell, which you may know, I've told it a long time ago on the podcast, was when I was filming the work I was doing on a Japanese white pine for YouTube. And I was getting tired. And if I say it once, I'll say it a million times. You shouldn't use tools or you shouldn't do bonsai when you're tired. When you do, you start cutting corners. You start getting very slack with how you do things. Anyway, this day I was filming, so I was trying to be as efficient as possible. Had out these little wire scissors, which are like a small, sharp pair of scissors that sit comfortably in the palm of your hands. And they're really good for light wires. You know, nothing too thick, nothing too sturdy. But for those light wires, you can fly through it. And the thing is with these, that the tip of them is very strong and very bloody sharp. So I was going along, filming, cutting off this wire, removing the wire as part of the process of stripping it out, reapplying wire, reshaping the tree, and then voila, there we are, we're done. So I'm getting tired. I've been doing this for hours and hours and hours of wire removal because Japanese white pines are notorious for having a lot of wire on them. Tip to toe, they'll be wide. So I'm going through, get the wire, grab it with my hand, cut. Get the next one, pull down the branch, cut, and keep working my way along the branches. So I can remember this time I got a little bit distracted and I looked away and I'm cutting and I'm looking at something and cutting and looking at, and I went snip. And as I did it, if you think about your pointer finger, come down to the first crease in your finger and just go to that meaty section that's just past it. The tip of these wire cutters had gone right through the meat of that first finger. And it's like, as soon as you do it, you know, when you do something stupid and you go, oh yeah, that's bad, without even looking, you realise that you've done something which may require stitches. Well, hopefully you don't know that, but it's a common thing for me growing up that I do things, stupid things, and suddenly go, oh yeah, that's going to take a trip to the doctors, that one. That's not going to get away by itself. Anyway, so I cut this thing. looked down quickly and went, oh, there's no blood. That's really bad and it's really deep. So I just kept cutting, finished the branch, then pretended to walk away, quickly hit pause on the filming so I could stop, and went, oh my God. And by this stage, I had blood dripping down my hand. Grab it, bandage it up, put it all back together. The finger's throbbing, but I thought, I've got to finish this. I can't have the video where I change my clothes or it's the next day or whatever. Just finish this thing. So then I come back, and you may look back on this video and you'll see the point in time where I go from having normal looking hands to, on one hand, I've got this big bandaged up finger with band-aids all over it. And then anyway, there you go. So you've just got to be careful when you're tired and you're working with sharp objects. Please concentrate. All right, so the next one, which is very particular to repotting, for me especially, using very sharp sickles, is number 5, the sickle slice when repotting. Now, this one, again, I've learnt the hard way. So the incident comes when you remove the tree from the pot. I use a sickle to go around the edge of the pot to break the bond between the tree and the pot, and you then get to lift the tree out, get the pot all ready to go for repotting, work the root ball, put it back in, tie the tree in, and voila, you're done. Repotting's over. So with the dragging of that sickle, especially when they're brand new, that blade can be bloody sharp, really, really sharp. And again, it's one of those things that the firmer the tree's stuck in the pot, the harder I find that I pull the sickle. Rather than just doing the gentle dab working in one area, I do this big drag. I used to do this big drag of the sickle. And this one day that I was doing it, I had my hand behind the sickle. So the sickle dragged and hit the meaty part that joins your thumb and your forefinger, right in that part, and cut it. Did actually quite a nasty little bit of damage. In fact, on the weekend, I had a repotting intensive and someone didn't bring gloves, so I bought them out a pair of gloves. I said, here you go, use these ones. They're very heavy-duty rubber. They're the ones that I love because they protect your hands and they look after you. And as we looked at the left-hand glove, I'm right-handed, so my right hand controls the sickle. You look at the left-handed glove, you could see a drag mark from the sickle that had gone right down the rubber and split the rubber on this glove. So wearing protection is by far the best thing that you can possibly do, and make sure that they're sturdy. I used to wear really thin repotting gloves because I used to love the touch and feel of the contact, but I've moved on to heavier duty rubber gloves because of this very thing, that this sickle damage. You've got to be on your guard. You've got to make sure that your non-working hand, the hand that's holding the pot, is further up and higher away than where the sickle is going to drag from. Never pull that sickle back, because I guarantee it's going to come loose, it's going to fly back, it's going to skip across the top of the pot and just jam straight into your hand. So it's another injury along my bonsai journey that I definitely try and avoid. But if I can't avoid it, I try and make sure that when it does happen, it does minimal damage. All right, so the next one is the wire slice. I don't mean to make bonsai sound like it's a bloodletting sport, because it's definitely not. But these are things which, when it comes to injuries, that are quite common for me and quite common that I see through the workshop with so many people coming through the workshop. Now, this wire slice, this comes from an incorrect cutting technique on heavy wire. If you look at your typical bonsai wire cutters, they come together in a nice V. And when you have a thick wire, let's say it's 4 millimeters or above, and you cut that wire gets pushed into a very sharp point, which is, it basically follows the same texture or angle as what your wire cutters do. Now, that's not normally a problem, but when you put that wire on that tree, that tip of the wire that's remaining on each piece of wire that you're cutting becomes sharpened because it comes into a point. And once the wire gets above about 2 mil, and especially around the 4 mil mark, as I was saying, it becomes like a razor blade. It becomes like something which is deadly sharp, that as you put your hand in and out of the tree for whatever reason is, whether you're removing wire, whether you're bending branches, whether you're cleaning fallen debris it's got into the inside of your tree, I guarantee you're going to slice yourself. So the best way to avoid that is with really good practice. Bonsai always comes down to the fine detail. So when you're cutting your thick wire, the trick is to, as you put pressure onto the wire cutters to cut the wire, slide your hand away from the wire. So that blade that's on the wire cutter cuts a very flat surface. It's something you'll need to practice, but if you practice with an old piece of wire, just cutting and sliding your hand, rolling your wrist as you cut the wire, you'll find that you'll end up with a very flat piece of wire as opposed to a very sharp point. You won't thank me now, you won't think of it now, but I say this every time to people when we're working on big trees and they get these cuts on their hand, it's the sort of thing that you will look back on and say, yeah, I remember Scott told me about that. I should have made sure that I've cut this wire properly. So the next one on the list is the foot stab. Now this one, I guarantee if you've worked with bonsai and you've worked with your tools, anytime that you drop your tools, the natural instinct that I have, which I know it's very common, is to throw your foot out. So as I'm working with my scissors and I'm put them down on the bench and I go to shuffle my tree around on the bench and I knock those scissors off the bench, the first thing I'll do to try and stop them hitting the ground, because I know they're valuable, it's important to keep them in one piece, is to throw my foot out to break the fall of those scissors. Now, there used to be a time that I would work on my trees in thongs. Flip-flops, depends on where you are around the world, but in Australia we call them thongs, which basically means there's zero protection on top of your foot. You can tell where this is going. It hasn't ended well on more than one occasion. So now, when I'm working on my trees, my general preference, even if I'm working in shorts in hot period, I'll wear covered toe shoes. And more often than not, they're going to have steel caps in them just to prevent anything from crushing my foot that falls over. But also, it's mainly to provide me that reassurance that if I need to throw my foot out to stop a tool from hitting the ground and breaking, bending, being damaged, whatever it is, I know that I'm pretty safe. So you want to watch out for that foot stab. Right, so if you've got big bonsai, one really common thing you've got to watch out for, a really common thing that I get from awkward lifting, which I know there's techniques to it, but sometimes when you've only got one person and the tree's way too heavy for one person, then you're going to be lifting very awkward just because of the nature of the beast, the way the foliage grows over the pot, the size of the pot that you've got compared to the tree. Back damage. Oh, seriously, I can't tell how many times I've sat down after a long day's work and gone, geez, my back is killing me. So it's a really common one. The best advice I can give you is get someone else. I wish I'd follow my own instructions sometimes. Most times I really wish I'd listen to myself. But it's it's lifting really heavy bonsai, lifting them awkward, being hunched over, not using your knees, all that stuff. But I'm telling you, it's something that will stay with you for a very long time. And it's a really common thing that I hear from people that maybe avoid repotting their trees because they're too heavy to lift, or they suddenly look to move on trees because they just can't care for them. They can't get them down to work on them at a reasonable level. It's because of these back injuries and the damage we do to ourselves with these beautiful big beasts. Now, I'd like to say after that little short break that we're done and we can move on. But no, there's plenty more bonsai injuries that I've been through that I want to talk to you guys about. So this one, let's talk about high-speed injuries. Now, these are Dremels, die grinders, any kind of mechanical device that plugs into power or is rechargeable that has a cutting bit on it or a tip on it of some kind that we use to design or apply to deadwood or carve or do any of that sort of stuff with our bonsai. They are extremely dangerous and they take a hell of a lot of practice to get right. Controlling the way that the blade cuts and the jump factor that you're going to get from the blade when you're working with it takes a lot of experience. It's like anything. It's like a carpenter using a nail gun or a saw or drop saw, anything like that. When you only use them very infrequently, that's when a lot of this stuff goes wrong. So you've got to, one, make sure that you're very practiced, two, be extremely safe with it and take all the bloody precautions that you can for eyes, hands, face, arms, body, legs, feet, whatever it is, to make sure that you're going to do as little damage to yourself if something goes wrong as possible. So let me tell you a story. There was this day where I was carving, lots and lots of carving. It was, I had a full day of it. And they were big trees, like they were massive, massive trees. And I'm sure I've talked about this before on podcasts, but it's worth reminiscing as we go down this path of bonsai injuries. And I was working with die grinder, which spins at a rapid rate of knots. Very good, very reliable, very, very good quality machine. Great cutting bit on it. It's got a bit of an extension, which anytime I find that the cutting bits sort of get further away from the tip of the die grinder, the more dangerous it becomes, the more prone they are to movement, and once you get slightly out of whack, they can get very very dangerous once they're unbalanced. That wasn't the case with this one. So this was spinning really nicely, working really well, and I had to hollow out the core of these trees, some big bougainvilleas, and I was working up inside them, and they were massive, like, size of my torso, size of my body, and cutting away, and I've been at it all day, and I was bloody exhausted. I just wanted to stop. I just wanted to finish. I thought, no, I'll just do this last little bit. And anyway, my general, when I say general, I normally always have two hands on whatever the machine is. I find that's by far the safest. By having one, it means that you've got a second hand which is somewhere that can be damaged. And it's common if you just you get onto any of the bonsai forums anywhere, on any of the platforms, you'll see sooner or later there's pictures of people that have lost fair amounts of skin and muscle tissue from these die grinders at one point or another, and they're just bloody dangerous. In the wrong hands, they're very dangerous. So anyway, this day I'd been using this thing, and I'm well practiced. I'm well versed on, push it this way and it cuts well. Do it that way and it's going to jump. So don't move on that side of the blade. Always make sure you move on this side of the blade. Have it nice and smooth. Small, gentle movements as opposed to big, long gouges. And anyway, I had my hand off. I was working with one hand on the tool, the second hand holding the side of this timber because I was getting tired and I wanted to steady myself. Comes down, I was wearing at this stage these big, thick, heavy gloves. And as I was wearing them, thank God I was, because as I've moved down towards the fingers of the gloves, the tip of the cutting blade on the die grinder has grabbed the corner of one of my fingers. And luckily it grabbed the tip of the glove and it ripped the glove strapped around my wrist. It was secured, ripped the whole thing clear off my hand. And I thought, oh my God. One, it's time to turn it off. Secondly, it's time to go home and have a really good rest. Thirdly, just never ever do that again. Never have it where my hand is off the die grinder, because if that had been millimeters closer, then I reckon there'd be a tip of my finger somewhere embedded into that bougainvillea. So it's just one of those things that when you're working with power tools, you need to have complete respect for it, no matter how many times you've used it, and make sure that you're at peak condition yourself to make sure that you're on guard for it. So moving on from that little nightmare, the next one is this is number 10 on the list. This is called the crushed finger. And this, again, is from repotting time, and it mainly comes when I'm moving pots. And sometimes you have an awkward lip on the pot, or let's say it's a flat pot or whatever it is, and it's heavy, or the space between the foot and the lip of the pot that you're carrying isn't enough for your pinky finger. So to get your fingers in there to actually lift these things and then put them down safely. I can't tell you how many black nails I've caused for myself doing that. Especially when it's, referring back to a couple of earlier ones where it's that awkward lift and it's very uncomfortable and it's, you're sort of struggling to not break your back and you want to make sure you get this thing done as quickly as you can. That's when I get these crushed fingers, little black nails of hell, I call them. They're not good for you, not nice at all. The next one's like what I call a secondary injury. And this has nothing to do with bonsai. It's just more something happened to me while I was walking around the yard. And it wasn't really a massive injury. But anyway, so in Melbourne, Australia, over summer, we get these little nasty bugs, very light little things that fly around in our grass. And you don't know they're there until you actually walk up on them. And there was this period last summer where I was just doing the afternoon check of my trees, generally one of my favourite times of the day. Get a beer, have a cold drink, whatever it is, walk around the yard, just check the trees, make sure everything's okay. Does anything need a water? Do you need a bit of love, a bit of a cuddle? Are you okay? What's going on? Are you surviving? Do I need to focus on anything? How's it going? And my yard has a big patch of grass, which is lovely. It's nice and cool on those hot days. Really nice to walk across. Looks great when it's mown and nice and sharp and clean. Anyway, so I was walking along this thing. As I walked through this, must have been a swarm of these rotten little bugs that come up out of the grass, and as they flew up, I got a mouthful of these things and sucked them into my lungs. Filthy, rotten little monkeys, I tell you. I went from thinking, oh yeah, live and let be, to, I've got to sort you guys out because I don't want you getting anywhere into my bonsai. I'm not going to be breathing you back in again. Right, the next one, this injury. Now, if you've ever been through a summer with your bonsais, then you'll know what this one's about. This is the water bill injury. You can go from quite a reasonable water bill, having quite a lot of bonsai during the winter period, and get this false sense of security that it doesn't cost that much. That's great. It's actually, I'm not using that much. It's mainly the connection fee on the bill. Yeah, that's fine until summer comes around, and then you find that you're watering 3-4 times a day. You're ploughing these things in. You're dumping water on them left, right, and centre to try and get them through. You're doing the right thing by them, and then all of a sudden you get the water bill, and you think, oh my God, how am I going to survive with this water bill? I honestly have never seen a water bill as large as what I have. I say this every summer, but they seem to be getting larger. One, the cost of water's gone up, but secondly, the usage rate seems to be going through the roof. Got to work out a way of getting this cost down. Maybe I've got to reduce the trees. No, I'm not going to do that. I'll just keep paying for it. Right, the next one on the list, number 13, blood pressure issues. Now, these are quite common, again, with bonsai, and they're quite commonly caused by possums. I love possums. I'd love them to be somewhere else. I'd love them to live in another suburb. I'd love them to live in another country. I'd love to have my trees in New Zealand because they're fair game over there. Here they're protected and they're lovely. I love them. Please don't send me messages on being facetious, but I've had issues with possums that have been as destructive as all get out. I've seen plenty of examples. I see examples almost every week in the workshop where people come in and say, you won't believe what they've eaten this time. My issue, my story is, my blood pressure story is where I had this beautiful old prunus, a flowering plum, Japanese plum, very nice tree. I've done a lot of work on it, carved trunk, aging trunk, beautiful flowers, lovely fruit, very healthy, looks great. Had it for dozen years, more. I don't know how long I've had it for, but forever. Anyway, there's one day walking around the yard in the morning, get around there after spring, all this beautiful foliage everywhere. It's like, oh, how nice is this? Warm days are around, the foliage is getting green, everything's starting to look really nice around the yard. Look at this prunus, walk past it, that's magnificent. Look at that, yep, no worries. Keep walking, go around, turn around behind it, go back to the bench behind it, start looking at the trees there. Yeah, great, everything's doing really well, looking great. Now look back at the prunus from the other side of the bench. So looking at the back side of the tree, right where there was this big pole from my protective layer above it, my decorative area where the possums like to run amok. And they'd come down this pole and they'd hung off the back of this pole and stripped and eaten completely half of the tree. So it was a tree of two halves. When you look from the front, it's beautiful. When you turn it around the back, it is destroyed. Every branch is broken. All the foliage is eaten off this thing. So it was like someone had split this thing down the middle and removed half of it with a hedge pruner, and the other side was just left alone to do what it was going to do. And I can tell you that day wasn't a pleasant day for me. It wasn't pleasant if the possums had been able to hear what I was saying about them. But it's a very bad day for that tree because being it's an old tree, it's still coming back. This is years and years later, probably 3 or 4 years, and it still hasn't come back to where it was. And I'm sure it will get there, but it's one of these setbacks that if you can avoid the blood pressure issue of your pests in your area, then do whatever you can. I try and move the delicious trees away from any kind of structure whatsoever. Not always possible, and when they're hungry, they will destroy absolutely everything around the yard. So you can't stop them all the time. Right, next one, number 14 on the list. And don't worry, there's only one more after this one, so we'll wrap up this. It's not the end of the world for bonsai. It's not all bad. Next one's got to do with frostbite, and that's something which is happening currently in Melbourne as we're just past the middle of winter. And it's freezing, it's very cold. I still like to do my early morning checks, which involves getting a nice hot coffee, heading outside and walking around. But I can tell you, one thing that I don't always do, especially after there's been some kind of damaging winds or there's been a storm and I just lay in bed in the middle of the night thinking, I cannot wait to get out and check those trees because that wind is doing damage. I am certain something has blown over on the bench. I am positive that a branch has come off a tree and is going to smash one of my favourite trees. I just can't wait. So what I'll do in the morning is, rather than getting my coffee and getting dressed appropriately, I'll fly outside in tracksuit pants, sometimes with shoes on, that's optional, depending on how bad the night's been, and a T-shirt. And I can tell you, it's bloody freezing. So if you're going to go and check your trees, then make sure that you are dressed appropriately. And I can tell you that lots of praying to the bonsai gods when those storms are howling above the roof. And I've got a tin roof on my house, so when it rains and that wind's, gusting through the joint, it sounds a lot worse than probably what it is, especially if you've got a tile roof. But for me, it's one of those things that I just cannot sleep properly when I hear that wind coming. With so many trees in the yard, it's very unusual to not get some kind of damage. But, touch wood, when you go out there and you've lost 3 toes because it's so damn cold outside and you're racing around the yard looking for something that's wrong, let me tell you, it's certainly appreciated when it's definitely not happened. All right, so last one, number 15. Finger slice number 3. Now, this is one that hasn't happened to me, but there's a listener to this podcast who knows who he is, who it's happened to, and it happened with a retractable blade while shortening a grow pot and having your holding hand behind where that blade is going to move. Now, it was a polystyrene box. The blade didn't take a lot of resistance in the polystyrene box, but it's just a timely reminder that if you are going to be cutting these things down, and it does happen now, this time of repotting, a lot of this work with pots that the trees are in, even if it's in a black plastic pot from a nursery, you often look to reduce the height of it so the roots start to grow more laterally than that vertical up and down. So you want horizontal growth as opposed to vertical, so you reduce the height of the pot. How do you do that? You cut the pot down. If you're going to put it back into the same pot, if it's not moving into a bonsai pot or whatever it is, just be bloody careful. Anytime there's something sharp, you've got the potential to hurt yourself. And that's what this podcast, it's got a funny tinge to it, I suppose, but it being very serious that you just need to be careful. We work with sharp tools. We work with machinery. We do all this stuff as hobbyists, as people that don't potentially work with them every single day of the week like most professionals do that work with tools. We've just got to be very careful because they are sharp, they're designed to be very efficient at what they do, and they are indiscriminate from the point of view that they don't care if it's a branch or a finger. They don't care. They will do the same job regardless of what it is, so please make sure that you're very careful, and hopefully you can learn and avoid some of the potential bonsai injuries like I have, like all the finger slices. And I'm certain that there's more. This is just what I could put together in the time frame that I had for the podcast. Well, there we are, folks. Thank you very much for listening in. I do appreciate it. I love that you listen in. And of all the injuries that I've just been through, I suppose the one that I find hardest to cope with is the water bill injury. That's the one that seems to kick me in the guts every year. It's one that I know that's coming. I know that I'm going to be impacted by it, but I still do the right thing by my trees, and I always will. I always will make sure that they get number one priority and get as much care in the world. But being very serious, safety first, protection, go overboard. Be more prepared for it than what you should be. Wear safety goggles when you're repotting because I guarantee you're going to get stones in your eyes. If you're working with something sharp, think about hand protection, eye protection, all the rest of it. Anyway, stay safe, enjoy your trees, do what you've got to do, make sure you do it as best as you possibly can and enjoy it. It's a process. It's a journey. It's something that no matter how uncomfortable it is at the time, it's definitely worth getting tendinitis for. Till next time, happy bonsai.